So it is November 5th, Sunday morning. We are here to talk about emotional sobriety, mental obsession, how the two interact, how addiction plays a role in this mental incapacity and this mental insanity that can be created very simply in our own thinking, and then seem to be everything that's happening around us and everyone who's happening around us, and used as an excuse rather than a guidance system to see our culpability and our immediate participation in the creation of the effects that we're manifesting. And I've experienced this with many people, and our discussion is just expanding that conversation that I've had with people on an individual level, largely to get more perspective and also see that there is a very common nature between us that's occurring that isn't natural. The natural aspect of what isn't natural is common. So if you try to do something wrong in any way, let's say mathematics, which is a good excuse, if you do anything wrong in terms of how you function within mathematics, if the principles aren't abided by, the answer is going to be wrong. We don't all have to do the same wrong to recognize that fact, that the wrong that can be created can be seem wrong, more wrong because I'm doing it than what you're doing, simply because I'm experiencing the wrong I'm creating rather than the wrong you're creating. I'm hearing about the wrong you're creating, but I'm witness, dead center to the experience of the wrong I'm creating.
Yeah.
So Anthony and Ty and Jana and MK and Gabe are here to talk about this a little bit. We started a little bit with Anthony and the idea of trying to be feeling too critical about yourself and trying to reach perfection. And what's interesting, if you notice that things are what they are when we're not thinking about them, there's no imperfection in letting them be. If you compare something to itself, it's perfect. If you compare something to something else, there's always going to seem to be more or less of something as a result of the comparison, not because those things aren't the other. We know those things aren't the other things to be comparing them, but it's the differences in them we use to make believe that one is more perfect than the other, or one has some element more than the other, and as a result, it's closer to perfection. We think of perfection as an ideal, and yet we are, as spiritual beings, the essence of that ideal. And to any degree we don't think we're the essence of that ideal, we start looking at things as defective and deficient. It's not because things are deficient, it's the thinking about them that causes the sense of deficiency. So thoughts don't create reality, they manifest effects. And our experience is largely impacted by those effects.
I missed you all. Just have to say that. You always hit something or say something that resonates with me. But the last couple of weeks, again, been busy doing different things, and within that, there's been new experiences coming up. For myself and for Anna. Anna was having some just nerve-wracking experiences with, submitting her first offer and doing these different things that her emotions were coming up for her. And then I joined a Toastmasters group because I want to get better at public speaking. It's something that I shy away from for years. So I had a speech this last Friday, and oh boy, was I nervous. But something we both came to terms with was when we spent so much time drinking and we spent so much time numbing, we spent so much time avoiding those emotions or those feelings that come up, because we joke like, I would go have a drink right now. Like, this is that time frame where my nerves are getting the best of me and I need to suppress that in some shape or form. I don't want to experience whatever it is I'm feeling. But we obviously didn't have that ability, or we didn't make that choice to do so. We chose to feel it and go through it. But as uncomfortable as it was, I got through my speech much quicker and easier than I perceived it. it was still challenging. It wasn't easy, but it was new. And it just made me think a lot about the times over my life that I've just ran or numbed or just didn't want to feel that, whatever it was, as if I had a choice, but really you're just kicking the can down the road because it came up again. I tend to get emotional when I speak because I feel a lot. I have a lot of empathy, and it's when I'm standing in front of a group of people, I feel that just triggers it's either that or I think some people just get nervous and run away. But that was what I was struggling with for the past week, and it came up in that. Yeah, this is where I would drink and just kind of run from that feeling.
Well, that's a great example, MK, too, because, when I was in college, for the college that I did, the public speaking was generally the last class people did. Here you're getting ready to face the world, and the last thing people want to do is have any experience in actually speaking to people publicly.
No,
And
thank you.
so when I took it, I was in my second year, I think, and most of the people in there were taking it because they couldn't graduate without it. They'd put it off so long. Now, in our conversation, if I am preoccupied with the idea that my thinking is my creator, that my thinking about my thinking itself creates me as a self, rather than more thoughts about my experience and more thoughts about other people and more thoughts about the world and everything else that's going on, I believe I'm the creator of reality. And I believe I become the thoughts. Now I'm not perceiving the thoughts, and I'm not a witness of the thoughts. I'm not the observer of the thoughts. I'm actually in the thoughts. So that's fear, because I'm really not in the thoughts, but I'm acting as though I'm in the thoughts. And then I get very, very suspect of what everyone else is thinking, because I'm afraid they might see that who I think I am is not who I am. And standing in front of people is a very good neutralizer. In AA meetings, the opportunity to actually speak to people, 10, 15, 20, 100, 200, 300, 500, 1,000, 20,000 at the international conventions is very interesting, because all we're asked to do is tell our story. It doesn't have to be written out, doesn't have to be spelled out, doesn't have to be anything other than what we say when we do it. And there's always some trepidation, I would suspect. I know for me, I always go thinking I know exactly what I'm going to say, and I always leave wondering why I didn't. I rehearse it in my head. I don't do what I think because there is no script. And yet I leave wondering why I didn't get to those other points. There always seems to be a degree of pressure, a degree of noticing that you're being witnessed publicly.
But that was the thing that was most interesting for me, is that everybody kept saying, oh, it's easy, just talk about yourself. And that was so hard.
Right. Well, think about the self we've been developing is this self that isn't really who we are. It's a self born in thought and justification and rationalization and defense and reactiveness. It's an identity that isn't true. It's like we're standing up there and we're pretending we're Rockefeller or somebody, and we know we're not. And yet we're projecting this image, this reflection.
My friend actually had a different name, so he knew he would call his ego Bubba. And at the time that seemed so silly, but it's making sense now.
Well, but Anthony, imagine that we think of it as so real to name it, just like we think of our names as being who we are as bodies or beings. We're naming it as though it's got a life of its own. Think of that. We've got to be schizophrenic, at least to have two personalities in our experience. One is the I am thinking. The other is the thinking of the thinking itself. It can't really exist except to the thinking I do of it that I think is real, to make believe that I then become the thinking I do about it. So what do we say? I think of myself. You said earlier, Anthony, before we started the recording, that you take yourself too seriously. Well, think about that. If the self you're taking seriously is only your thinking of itself, you have no self to take seriously other than your thinking. And that certainly dispels the rumors about who you are pretty quickly, to see that your thinking of itself produces more thoughts about thinking, not about you. Some of those thoughts may be related to you because you're thinking about characteristics and experiences and what's happened and what hasn't happened and what you wish was happened, could happen, might happen. But ultimately, you're just thinking about your thinking. And that's a drowning pool, because eventually it goes stagnant, just like a farmer's soil that's constantly add the minerals and the vitamins drawn out of it. At some point, it becomes dead soil and water, stagnated.
I mentioned to you too, Jack, the other day that I realized that the only time I'm upset about my thinking is when it involves myself. Like if I'm just thinking about anything else, it's not a problem. I don't like that. And I notice most of my thoughts are about myself. So if I just stop putting me in there, it's going to be so simple.
But you aren't in there. If you stop believing you're in there, it will simplify. If you begin to see that that's the root of this issue, and think about the term self-consciousness. You know what the definition for self-consciousness is? Undue regard for appearance. Isn't that interesting? When people say, I'm really self-conscious, think about that. If we were really conscious selves, we wouldn't have an undue regard for appearance. We would have an absolute substantive basis that has no appearance, that doesn't appear to be anything. Just like the essence of our body we don't see, and the essence of gravity we don't see, the essence of air we don't see, and yet we utilize them all. Almost without question. And where do the questions come from? The thinking about our thinking itself. Constantly kind of trying to get it right, trying to figure it out, trying to come to terms, trying to get myself better. Think about how people say I'm working on loving myself more. So I am apparently different than the self I'm working on. Rather than saying, if I wasn't thinking of the self as who I am, I would say, I love my experience. I love my essence. I love love. Because love as an essence would be typically considered to be the nature of an infinite source. Because an infinite source isn't a taking source. It isn't a contemptful, spiteful, hateful source like humans tend to be or can be. It's a giving source, a provision. If there's actually a creator or a cause that's superior to the cause of our thinking, then that would be common to all of us, regardless of what we think. And the only thing we suffer from is in our experience thinking it's not true. Thinking who I am is what I think, as a result of what I think is reality and truth. It's a major glitch, and if it's at the core of all the other disorders, because it
How did you come up with that? I like that. I mean, what was the process where you finally figured that out?
Well, we've been doing it for the last 3 years. I mean, I've been doing it for a lot longer than that, but publicly.
You've always seemed to know that. It's not like that from day one. That's what I liked. You had that. I'm starting to adjust to it more, but I like that theory.
Well, Anthony, that's a very fair admission on your part to mention that you're beginning to adjust to it. Think of that. If you align the pipes in a drain, they're probably going to drain. If the pipes are not aligned, they're probably going to make a mess. But saying that you're adjusting to it is a recognition of your own will to start having things as they are, rather than thinking they're only what you think they are. It's the beginning of that flexibility. Nobody can do that for any of us, because we each have the right to think what we want, but it doesn't mean what we think is right. So beginning to see that the adjustments here are just beginning to say, oh, there's a little more going on than I've been thinking. And that awareness, if what you're thinking confirms reality, because it's aligned, if what you're thinking aligns with reality, you will feel confirmed in reality rather than feel displaced from reality. This whole idea that we're separate and we're alone and we're dejected and rejected and deficient and defective and all that stuff is coming out of the fact that our thoughts are defective and rejected. They have been applied and they don't work. Why don't they work? They don't have any place within the law of order that's been created within this natural universe that we're in. So to talk about it, and to your point, MK, doing this publicly, first of all, will help see what's wrong better, which actually helps feel worse for a minute because you're actually starting to feel that numbness that you were talking about. The numbness, think of it, we're sentient beings trying to become desensitized to our experience. That's a death wish. That is literally a suicidal tendency. We're trying to nullify our existence while we're struggling with whether or not we belong. And it isn't true that we're struggling with whether or not we belong. We're struggling with the thoughts that don't belong and the idea that they're true. And we keep wondering, how am I going to get them there? This is like a fish in water starting to say, if I don't worry about whether or not I'm in water, I am screwed. And then being screwed by the fact that he's preoccupied trying to figure out if he's in water or not while he couldn't be thinking about it if he weren't in the water. He'd be dead. We couldn't be wondering if we were apart from something if we weren't a part of it. Wouldn't happen. Can't happen.
What happened to the part if we're even discussing it, though? It's a possibility.
Well, but part of possibility is impossibility being thought of as possibility.
You never beat the master.
It doesn't mean it's possible. It means it's possible to think about it. And there again, we're isolating thinking as this source of potential that may have no potential other than to think of things that don't work. And when I think at the root, my thoughts are reality and they make me up. I think anything I think of has to work, so I'm going to continue to apply it and apply it and apply it while it fails and fails and fails. And I'm going to pretend it's not failing because I just haven't done enough of it. I haven't looked hard enough at it and I haven't worked hard enough on it. And what I need to do is more and more of it. That's addiction. If I can't fill a void because there's nothing there to fill, I can't fill the void. So to think there's even a void that can be filled shows how quickly my thoughts go to a rationalization that what I'm doing is honest and true, when in fact it is dishonest and untrue. Animals, molecules, all these things that work in the universe that allow us to even have this conversation do not think of themselves. Animals might. I mean, domesticated animals are the only ones I know of that are on psychiatric drugs. They give dogs didn't walk into a pharmacy and say, I'm nervous. Owners brought their dogs in and said, something's wrong with my dog. So they started giving them prescriptions.
Sweater vest.
Animals didn't come up with that. Humans did. So I'm not suggesting we shouldn't be domesticated. But if the domestic language we speak and the body language we're experiencing is thought to be a foreign language, we feel we're aliens in our own experience. And we feel alienated and disoriented and separate and alone and abandoned. That's a very frightful experience to create. If we were to experience that actually, like sitting a million miles from Earth in a bubble in space with no potential of getting back, that would probably be a very disturbing experience. And yet,
and the ironic part is that MK's questions were about real estate when he's talking to actually somebody that really knows real estate well. So you could go there and answer all those questions, but I don't think that would still solve the problem.
Well, the broader point, which is why my question earlier was, how do we, what's the point we can focus on that's going to include everyone? And my sense is when you get to the essence of the problem or the seeming problem, it now applies to everyone seemingly in their own way, but it's the same application. The only difference is we think about it differently and we think then it's different. But if we're thinking and struggling with the same problem, there is no difference. So it's sort of the unifying factor is always revealed.
Big picture. We talked about that yesterday.
What was that?
Big picture. We talked about that yesterday
Yeah.
when you were saying it's just the way you wanted it. I'm like, well, big picture, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, and to miss the big picture, meaning everything, is to struggle with some things and little
And
things.
that brings us back to my point. I don't like struggling with the little things.
Yes, you do.
I love it.
It helps you keep your focus off of
It is
big
the little
things.
things. I always say that too. It's those little things that I like.
But by doing that, Anthony, you give yourself the impression you're controlling by ignoring the totality of everything. It's just a sick consequence of the thinking that I'm not done unraveling the things that I've accumulated or I've been born with, or however it may seem that they have affected or infected my experience, cultural ideas and all that kind of stuff. I'm not done.
Surrender to win. Surrender to win. That's the key.
Well, you can say it, but actually doing it means noticing the fight. And until you notice the fight, it's very hard to surrender because you don't think you're in the fight. It doesn't mean you're not in the fight. It means that, again, you're thinking about things based on your thinking rather than the reality of the tension and the aggravation and the irritation and the inner conflict that you're experiencing, and thinking, I got this because I've been denying it so long and nobody's called me on it. I've got control. A lot of times, MK, my experience is that, like, I used to think as a kid I was honest if people didn't catch me stealing. I didn't think I was a thief if I didn't get caught. And it's the same idea in my thinking. I think that if I can keep it to myself in some way and think about it in some twisted way and keep working on it and not notice that I don't have to work on reality, because if I just apply things accurately to reality, I'm confirmed. And I can do, every time I do it, I'm always confirmed. I don't have to think about it at all. After a time, I just begin utilizing it. But this other thing that's created is very, very difficult to live with, and I would say has undermined human capacity and our absolute nature as long as we've been humans, and modernized our thinking around ideas that are not true, have us still killing other people because they don't think like us.
So can two objects occupy the same spot?
At the same time,
Yeah.
if two same objects can't, but apparently some other objects can. Gabe may be able to enlighten us on that point. But I would also suggest, Anthony, that if two objects can't occupy the same space at the same time, that means space is where two things can't occupy the same space. So it leaves a lot of room for things to exist, and a lot of room for perspective, and a lot of room for distance and dimension, which is the realm that human bodies function in. Doesn't mean our spirit functions in that realm, or our essence, our spiritual being nature. It simply means that we're like in a cockpit, and the dashboard of the cockpit has all sorts of levers and switches. And if we're well versed in how to turn them on and off according to the conditions that we're facing, the good chance the plane will continue to fly and it will land safely. But flying a plane for any period of time is no different than somebody jumping off a building and think they have control until they land.
So these certain things that humans know how to do instinctively, like hunt or somehow take care of a family, there must be something that's really good about just thinking your thoughts are who you are.
Well, it's kind of like being a gravedigger and thinking you're a shovel. Things would probably get very complicated when you begin to realize you don't want to be immersed in dirt today. You just don't want to be the head of that shovel being forced into the earth once more, the cold earth, and you think it's you rather than a tool. Thinking is a tool we have. It's a resource we have. It is something that we are given to help us navigate. If our navigational capacity has been undermined by an inability to address what's happening accurately, then we've been heading in the wrong direction, trying to get to a place that I would suggest we've always been in to begin with. There's no place to go if an absolute source exists. If a spiritual, unlimited, omnipotent, omniscient presence is present, then we're already here thinking we're not, because we're thinking things that are incorrect and launching in all of the other directions to try to solve the problem, rather than say, the problem is solved when I stop thinking that way. I stop thinking about things dishonestly. I stop lying about things that I'm trying to cover up and protect. And I suspect, MK, when we get into public, what we're afraid of is people seeing through the thing we've been projecting before we do. That's why people who have jokes made about them don't think it's as funny as everyone else.
That makes sense.
Gabe, are you with us?
Yeah, like Will Smith. He didn't like his joke.
So two things in space at the same time. There is, if I remember reading something in the last month or so, there are certain things that can seem to do that, but those things are almost theoretical at this point.
Yeah, just there is. It depends on what scale you're talking about. On the quantum level, not really, but on the atomic level maybe. But can Anthony and I stand in the same square foot? No, but unless I'm standing on top of him and I'm looking down, then we're both on the same thing.
Even then, you're not in the same space.
Yeah, so it's a matter of scale there.
So Anthony, if you're looking, if you look at everything that's changing, the point that everything, this is Aristotle now, this is 4,000 years ago, or however old he is now. If you look at the fact that everything's changing in a relative experience, the one thing that isn't changing is that everything's changing. But you can't see that by looking at all the things changing. You see it by looking at all things. So that's where the perspective is. If we're narrowly focused on anything and thinking that thing is everything, and you can think about your problems this way, then we're claiming there's nothing else happening simultaneously and wondering why we feel problematic and struggling and disturbed and afraid, because we've made a choice to make believe the entirety of reality is only what we're worried about, which isn't true. So we've lost.
If I look at a little thing that's bothering me, it's going to bother me. But if I look at the big picture, it's not going to really upset me.
You can let the little thing bother you, but if you see it accurately, you'll see that it isn't everything, because everything is still everything. And let me assure you that everything includes, when Gabe's talking about the subatomic level, what they're realizing is that everything seems to work very symmetrically in the general term, meaning the bigger, the macro level. But when you get beneath, what Einstein tried to do was marry the two so that he had I'm missing the general theory of relativity. Is that right, Gabe?
Yeah, well,
that's how we referred to it.
The theory of,
he wanted to marry the subatomic level, which they realized
galaxies.
What's that?
With galaxies and the subatomic.
Yeah. So on the grandest scale, he wanted to see everything because he knows, like we suggest here, that everything must be working together for everything to be happening right now. The fact that we don't understand it doesn't mean that it's not understandable. It means that we have a relationship to it that is confused.
Or just stop it, everything must be. Like, why did you need to go on past that? You don't really need.
But that's the point.
Yeah.
Is that it is what it is, doing what it's doing.
Not even what it is. It just must be. It's like I don't have to analyze whether or not it is what it is. It's there. It doesn't. I don't need to go farther than that.
That's good. Very good. So,
and also, I wanted to say,
Anthony, while we're on that point, that's not a small point for you to make, by the way.
Okay.
Because that's not a story. That's about literally saying something in words that add up.
Yeah.
That are succinct. And actually, I can tell you feel relief from even considering that.
Yeah.
So,
and also the honesty too, just real quick, is this meeting, I never liked the name mental obsession. I couldn't get people to come. I wanted to call it something else. But the truth is, man, my mood is determined if my stack of firewood is perfectly stacked, like that's not a normal thing, that everything has to be perfect. It's a mental obsession. So I just wanted to get that out, just admitting it instead of saying, well, I'm in the wrong, I like the group, but it's not really the right name.
Why do you, Anthony, why do you think you didn't like the name?
Because it's terrible.
No, stop. Why do you think you didn't like the name?
Because it calls me out on what I'm really doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like it.
We hide that. We hide that way. It's the name of the thing that's the problem. It's not that you're doing it. It's the name.
Yeah.
It's a quick diversion, an escape valve, a chance to make believe that because something else is happening that you can pin the tail on, that you're not it.
Well, I really realized that I'm really happy right now because my stack of firewood is perfect. And I go, there's got to be some, I mean, that shouldn't
Let's
be.
take it back to the point you just made very clearly.
Yeah.
The stack of firewood is the stack as it is, being as it is. It's just what it is, right? There's nothing confusing about that at all. It's your thought about it that bothers you. It isn't the stack of firewood.
It's a perfect stack of firewood.
It is only perfect when you're not seeing it as it is not. But when
The ironic part is it's because it's perfect, it can't use it as firewood now.
Actually, it's exactly the opposite. Now you're perfectly capable, just like the gravedigger who doesn't want to dig his shovel bin because he feels he's the shovel and doesn't want to get buried in dirt again today. You start seeing it as a resource that is utilizable. You can use it. It's usable. It's something that becomes valuable rather than depreciated because you're worried about how it looks in relation to how you think it should look. And all of a sudden you can't even use the firewood and you're freezing to death. This depreciated capacity is evidenced in our human history. While we claim to be the superior beings on this planet, we act very differently than that. And it must be that the premise of those actions is faulty, that something is wrong. And to simply come to terms with that is to start to notice that that adjustment you mentioned earlier is starting to say, oh, I've been fighting to simply do the smallest thing I can do by thinking I knew enough not to do the thing at all. And in fact, all I was doing was reinforcing the wrong, some new defense, some new way of doing it. And what happens in our conversation, Anthony, is that it goes in loops and loops and loops and loops of new stories about the same old thing, right? And it's not just you and I. I'm talking with you now, but I'm mentioning that all of our conversation works off that basis.
And sometimes me more.
Sometimes what?
Me more. Sometimes it is about just my.
Yes. Okay. I would say you like to jump into that ring in the circus maybe more than everybody else. But in a way, Anthony, what I see that is your hunger to deal with it.
Thanks.
When people are really distressed, they're really asking, they're crying for help. When their situations get really ugly, they're crying for help. They're asking for help, and that's how they know to ask. The twisted version of all those thoughts led to that. And they're saying, I need your attention. I don't know how to ask for it because I'm so buried in this thinking I'm doing. I don't know what else to do because I keep doing the same stuff and it keeps turning to shit. And I don't know how to admit it because I don't really like living in shit. I don't like smelling like it either. I don't like anything that comes close to it because I generally tend to get rid of it and flush it away, not live with it, not be in it, not look like it, not smell like it. So talking about it and seeing it that way also is interesting because it's really, in the big book, Bill Wilson said, we wouldn't treat a sick person this way, meaning spiteful, hateful. Somebody's in the hospital, you go and try to support them. They're struggling with something. And yet in the mental things, we hold people in contempt for saying things that aren't right, that we don't like, that we're defensive over. We write them off. We think they're toxic, rather than they're actually revealing the toxicity in our own thinking and giving us a chance and an opportunity to have perspective in something that we feel blind to otherwise, or think we are blind to otherwise. Think isn't there.
So thanks for your help, Jack, because it's 3 years goes by slowly sometimes.
Well, but think of the immediacy now, Anthony, of even noticing that. You realize if it's right, and I'm not telling you it is, because we each get to really come to terms with this in our own way. And that tends to be the fascinating stories we tell, because those road trips are really an adventure. They're really an exploration. They're not a repetition of why excusing us from doing what we're doing. They're really the enlightenment of seeing how well we can actually begin to perform once we're reformed in our own ability to think. And then transform things. Literally, we're not creating reality, we're transforming existing reality. We're turning it
I'd
into
love to
something.
get into Ty's mind right now because I can see him, and I see him shaking his head a little bit. I'd only be a guest to what he's thinking. Any input on that, Ty, on this? It seems like you're right there.
No, I'm good.
That's where I want to be. I want to be able to say no input. Right? I don't think I've ever said that in my life.
Well, we'll all confirm that.
Where am I going wrong, Ty? That's what I'm asking. What's the problem here?
Well, one of the other areas, and this, we talked about this yesterday, Gabe and Lauren Alice and I took a walk, and one of the things I pointed out that she heard, and I know that I've said it many times before, but she said, oh, is that we're always asking what rather than focusing on that. So what am I doing wrong means I'm going to take the sick thinking I'm obviously admitting I have, and I'm going to turn that now in the direction of trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong. So I'm using sick thinking, which is dark, right? There's no light in it because it isn't reality. It isn't essence. It's just this thought I have. And I'm going to go looking for the answer. So seeking has been very common in human history. Everybody's seeking. Nobody seems to ever find anything. What they find is a new way to do it, to give some people an impression that they figured it out, but not enough people to be done with it and say, okay, that's over. When we discovered we were not at the center of the universe, it didn't take long. Very few people are arguing that anymore. They're not spending a lot of time on it. Or that the horizon was the end of the world and doom. Once it became obvious, it stopped being a question of why and where. But if you look at that, what is happening is happening. When there's what I look at is say, what is my state of mind right now? What is my state of awareness? And I often find that I'm distressed and depressed. Part of the transition isn't coming from the conflict that I have dissolved literally by simply allowing the things that I used to do to just become more noticeable. And as a result, they stop happening.
Yeah.
But starting to notice that we're in a world that is distressed with other people who are distressed. And there's a lot to be distressed about when that's the case, because this is our family of humans that we're talking about. This isn't some random group of people who just arrived from some other planet like the pioneers of old that were also discriminated against because they were immigrants when everyone was an immigrant. They were just who was the longest immigrant, and everyone else who was shorter than that got less consideration. But we're talking about a species, our species, having a major impact on each other, obviously on the planet to whatever degree we've impacted it, functioning at a level that's well beneath our capacity to continue to rationalize that we're obviously not there and looking to be there and get there and seeking it, rather than considering that what we're doing isn't healthy. So to say something is, or to say it is very different than what is it. Because I have a relationship, the immediacy of everything is in the present, and I would suggest the present is not in time. We're witnessing it in time because our bodies are designed to witness time, but our beings are not witnessing time at all, because they're just a present state of awareness that is the essence of our experience. So you noticed, by the way, when you're talking about adjusting, you can't adjust if you're not thinking about having been a certain way and now you're not that way. So it's that comparative analysis that gives you that conclusion that you're adjusting. But being doesn't feel like any adjustment because it's never changed the entire time we've been thinking about it differently. So coming to know what we know in the immediacy, and I think you just as you spoke to that, Anthony, because you were pushing back on my words, I was saying it is what it is, and you're saying, why even bother with that? Just let it be, right? It was even simpler. You saw that. The confirmation of our awareness has us start saying things we can't even imagine where they come from, because they're not coming from anywhere. We're simply expressing something we've always known that we haven't bothered to say. Starting to come into that confirmation of reality, because we're dealing with what's happening now rather than why is it happening, where is it happening, when is it going to finish, where all that stuff that we do. What is it? What is happening? We're not asking questions. We're stating the fact. How things are right now is how things are right now. And that beingness, as you pointed out, is the essence of that. It's just a present state of being. Any words we use to begin to describe it are going to fall prey to all other words that may be better used by others, and think that the division of those ideas in the definition of the words defines the segregation of the ideas that each of us have, when in fact it's just the facility we're using to speak or spell what we're trying to say that we all already know, that doesn't have any words attached at all. The knowingness doesn't have any words in it, because it isn't a thinking knowingness. It's a knowing knowingness. It's an awareness. And we fight over words, how things are said. So the aim of words is to reference, to point, not to conclude. When I think my thoughts are real, I think my words have to explain it in every last drop of detail. And all the literature and all of the philosophy and all the encyclopedias that have ever been written have not quite done it yet. Because that's not the point of words. Words are references. They're a chance to define things in ways. The words are changing, the definitions are changing, the use is changing constantly, because everything within everything amongst things are always changing. But the being nature doesn't need to be spoken to be absolutely present. And we each know what it is. We just think we don't when we think thoughts are real, because we don't know how to put our finger on it. We don't know how to grasp it. We don't know how to put the words to it that would give us the sense that our thinking is it, because our thinking isn't it. And when we begin to concede that, the knowingness of it starts to actually flow through our thinking, because it's like a dam thinking its job is to prevent the water from running through it. When if that's the case, when the water runs over the dam, it destroys the dam. It takes it down, completely undermines its complete capacity to hold the water back. And that's a nervous breakdown for us. Those are meltdowns, what we call meltdowns. That's a nuclear reactor that has gone out of control. And the damage is significant, and to see it clearly is to be disturbed. And the difference is, instead of it being a disturbance I'm creating to avoid the disturbance that's happening, I can start to see that I have not been a very powerful influence in all those things to be having them happen the way they're happening, and start to actually grow in a direction, potential direction of talking about them in ways that may allow some productive benefit to come out of any direction chosen. Some awareness, some attempt to actually look at what's happening honestly enough. If we all know it and we're simply not admitting it, we're simply not seeing that we know it, because we don't understand what understanding means ultimately. It's certainly not misunderstanding and mistakes. It's taking things for what they are, as they are. If my relationship now is in perfect order and all that's confounding it is my thoughts about it, that alone as a concept makes my thinking a lot less imperative than my awareness that if that knowingness is something I know. When I started considering this, I began to realize that's the meditation. That's me meditating as a human. And I can be anywhere doing anything and know that despite how I think and how I feel and what's happening around me, whatever the circumstances, whatever the calamity, whatever the conflict, I know that knowing is absolutely knowing right now. That puts me in a relationship to that conflict where the conflict becomes the size of the conflict as it is, rather than everything there is. Starts to be not only manageable, it starts to be seen as something that isn't as big a deal, because I'm not turning it into everything. I can then have it as it is and deal with it in some way that's productive. Not trying to manage the problem, looking at the solution, looking at the conflict accurately gives me a chance to actually address it.
And maybe not even as it is, but just is. Doesn't even have to be as.
Yes, you're simplifying it, and that I would give you great credit for doing.
Thank you, sir. The teacher. Good teaching.
No, you're teaching right now, Anthony. Your capacity is no greater or smaller than mine. If this infinite thing,
It's our capacity, as Janet would say.
exactly, and it doesn't come in sizes because it's the thing about the infinite.
No, she didn't say that part, though.
It's not dimensional. It's not time bound. It's not bound at all. It's
Or it could be. We don't even have to worry. Maybe it is. Who cares?
Well, I would say if it is, what would it be bound by? Just like something
Itself. It's bound by itself. It's so ironic, you know?
Well, I would say that's the thinking. But my sense is if you really begin to consider the infinite, you begin to see it's not even in a realm that can be bound because it's not within the whole concept of time and space. And yet it's here. It's here, but it doesn't need to be in it to be here because we are of it. It must be here too. So I can easily be wrong in all of this, Anthony. I don't speak.
Yeah, because I was going to say, if we're even discussing it.
Well, again, we can also discuss impossibility as being possible. That doesn't make it a worthy discussion. It makes it a new story about what's wrong, trying to make it right, which we can do.
But I like shortening as it is to just it is. It doesn't even have to be as it is, you know?
Well, think about what as is. When you buy a car as is, what are you taking? Think about it. It's telling you it's as is. You're getting it in the condition it's in, like no kidding. But what's it really saying? No warranties, no guarantees, no assurances. Nobody's saying this thing is in excellent running order. Just saying it is how it is. Well, that's how everything always is. So we're always in the face of as is in terms of our human experience. And we're in the being nature, as you're describing, that is. It just is. And think of what an ism is, Anthony. Alcohol.
You almost don't even need two ises. It's just is. It's not really is.
Either way. Ultimately, it's not the words. So is even excessive when you. These are human expressions. Language is a human expression. God apparently seems to speak every language because it's not a language that's being spoken. It's a present state of being that's being present as it is, all that is, always, wherever anybody is, it is. We're of it. Now, all of this can be debated. And all of this has been debated as long as people have been fighting each other and using their conclusions as a righteous indignation to oppress and suppress and kill each other.
Although technically we're disgusting, right?
Well,
I like the new shirt. For our home viewers, Jack has a beautiful blue shirt on today.
Anthony, everyone, we're all to a degree thinking about things in ways that are unique to the thinking we're doing. And we're given that. That's one of it. In my experience, the one thing we have is the choice to think what we want. That's what defines us, not how we think or what we think about, as much as that we can think whatever we want. That's the significant difference. Yeah. The point of that is that I can't tell you, I can't tell anyone else what to think. I can tell you that. But it really.
The Lord knows you've tried 1,000 times.
Yes, the Lord does know that. And I don't know why you would say 1,000 when it's probably well in excess of that. But the point is that when I'm not just willing, but when I'm ready and when I'm able, and I would say I'm always able, but I'm not always ready and willing, something seems to happen. And if I can come to terms with that and realize that any of the conflict I'm witnessing is evidence of this seemingly secret policy that I have to resist and to fight and to deny and to defend and to maintain these ideas I have, is coming, I almost feel bullied by the fear created in the thinking I'm doing that's wrong, which is now this self-inflicted fear, and feeling if I let go, I'm really going to be screwed, rather than seeing that the witnessing of it, the facing of it, the having of it, which can be daunting, I will mention, when you really begin to look at this stuff, it's going to cause, it isn't causing fear. You're starting
Yes.
to see the fear you've been maintaining accurately and honestly, and it will dissolve. It will dilute. It will go away. It doesn't exist. It's literally disillusion rather than resolution. Resolutions happen every year and seem to be needed every year because we're constantly solving things that aren't being solved. We're coming up with new patches and new ideas of how to try to feel better and how to get over it, how to deny it in a new way. Hi, Jackie. So our conversation has taken some time within the human dimension that we're operating to get to a point that these thoughts can be talked about, Anthony. And I don't think it's ironic that it's coming from you. You've been one of the most vocal proponents for the mental obsession.
I hate this.
So the struggle,
I had to go outside to get a piece of firewood so I didn't destroy my perfect stack.
the struggle is evidence of something that is in conflict. Internal conflict, anxiety, stress, pressure, all the depression, all of those things are evidence that something's going on in our mental capacity. And if we are each given this freedom to choose what we think, and we overlook that, we're going to think what's happening is being caused by something else, somewhere else, someone else, and feel like a victim to it and feel there's nothing we can do about it. And as a result, there's nothing we can do to solve it. That's hopelessness. To simply see that we're choosing thoughts, even if we have pre-existing genetic conditions that cannot be overcome. We've got no arms and no legs. We have no tongue. We can't speak. What we do have is what we do have. And what we are able to do with what we have is going to either be diminished in capacity, diminished capacity meant by what we do mentally about it. If what I have is what I have, then what I have is what I have. I don't have to know every last detail about that to come to that conclusion. And I can start living on a basis that's healthier because my relation to everything, even in the most general way, is healthy. And now I'm not running in conflict. I'm simply experiencing what's happening in a brand new seeming way that's not new at all, except that the moment is always new, always seems to be new, always seems to be ever presently possible. What I just did doesn't condemn me unless I think what I just did condemns me. And so this moment becomes the thought about the other moment that condemns me. And what do I feel? Condemned to repeat it. It isn't true. It isn't real, but it is certainly something I can imagine. And dreams are probably one of the best metaphors for this, because if we're in a hypnotic state of a hallucination being reality, and we're thinking it's true, it is the thinking of it as truth that we're struggling with. It isn't the thought we're thinking about. I can think anything I want, any way I want, and it isn't until I think that it's reality and truth that I begin to step into that dream state where I am the creator of reality and truth. But what's interesting is, think of your dreams. When you have a nightmare, what happens? Anyone?
Hey, Lindsay. Good morning. So speaking of, when you wake up when you have a nightmare.
Yes. Okay. So think about that as a metaphoric example. You wake up. What happens when you wake up?
Thank God you were dreaming.
Exactly. Freedom. So if we are capable of doing that in our night sleep, and we know those things so clearly about the night sleep, This conversation is about starting to see that we're doing it in our daydreaming while we think we're awake. And to the degree that we're nursing thoughts that aren't real, aren't true as reality and truth,
Yes.
we're also having a nightmare about our own experience. And the only difference is we think it's true and real because our eyes are open and we're
Yes.
witnessing everything in a different way.
Exactly.
It's very good, Anthony. Your ears have gotten bigger overnight. So if the dream state is a dream state, and we remember that it's a dream state, and just begin to say, oh, if I have this inner conflict that seems so horrendous, this is a nightmare I'm creating because I think what I'm thinking is reality rather than simply a dream, just imagined. Thoughts are imagined. They aren't reality. Reality is reality. Reality existed well before our species ever came here, way before. And let's say it wasn't way before. Let's say it was a parsecond before, just the smallest second, microsecond. I forget what that's called, Gabe. What's the smallest?
Like nanosecond.
Yeah, nanosecond. So let's say it just started before that. It started before us, regardless of how long. Reality, life, all things happening have been happening. We're a byproduct of it. We aren't the creator of it. To live as though we're the creator of it has us think we bear the burden of it all. And we're blinded by the ideas that come as a result of that, rather than start to see that that loving absolute source has never been anything but that. And the only reason I call it love is I grew up in a Christian Science church, which is what my mother was. And it said God is love in gold leaf on all the churches. And I used to say to her, why don't these people act that way? Because some of the kids and some of the adults were just not very kind, I found. They were actually posing as kind, but if you did anything out of line, they did not act that way then. And that seemed very odd to me as a very young kid. So if it's love, the point is, if it's infinite, it would be an ever-giving, everlasting, everything, always, always, always generous, complete and whole, not in parts and pieces like we think of. If we think we're waiting for God to give us something and the infinite source is our source, we already have everything, and now we're using God not answering as an excuse for what we're not willing to do. Because like with the firewood, we've turned the pile into something we can't even touch. We can't utilize the potential of it as a resource. So we're not utilizing the potential of our thinking as a resource because we're trying to create, we've made it the leader rather than have it follow the leader.
Hi, Lindsay.
Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning.
Jackie, Mark, I know you're back in Michigan. Welcome, Jackie. You're probably in LA.
I had a very busy morning, so I was running on time. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here. You may want to listen back through this during the week, because I think we hit on a lot of very good points that you and I had talked about here probably 2 weeks ago or so. And to the points we talked about, Lensis, Anthony, also everyone, but I'm aiming at Anthony because he's had, I would say, a couple of commentary breakthroughs, which I appreciate. If I'm living making believe that the world is against me and everything is wrong, and I've chosen to do that, the proximity of that choice to my experience is immediate. Nobody can ever get that close to me. Nobody's in my brain. I might get bacteria in there. I might get, I don't know what you can get in there. What are they, leeches or something? You know, there's stuff that can get into the brains that really screws the brain's ability to function up. But I become the cause that's central to my problems. Now, and it's not I becoming it, I am choosing to do things that are creating those problems and think that it's something other than me. And when I do that, it is traumatic. And I would say it isn't post-traumatic, it's present traumatic. And the longer I do it, the longer I think it's post, because I think of it as something that didn't happen now rather than seeing it as something I'm doing now. And if I'm thinking it's happening somewhere that doesn't exist, like in a past somewhere, where's the past? There's no storage container for that. There's no place to go to find it. It's always where we are. It's always in the present. If I'm thinking of it in the past, I'm going to think of it as an impossibility to resolve and continue to perpetuate the trauma and be pretty sure everything's wrong in the world when there's a lot wrong in the world, but I'm not going to see it as the actual wrong in the world. I'm going to see it as the wrong I'm doing and feel completely incapacitated to do anything about the wrong in the world, because now I haven't even resolved my own problem. I can't see clearly what good am I going to be to anyone at all. And what does the 12 steps say? It says they're designed to help us become usefully whole. Why? Beneficial to others. Why? Service. What can we do for others? How can we be well? And if I'm sick in my own thinking, I am not of any service to anyone at all. I'm actually a disservice to people. If I'm thinking that I'm good because I'm doing certain things and they're all tokens to give the impression that I'm a good guy to make me look better, I'm again feeding the appearance rather than the substance, and realizing everybody is intact. It's what they're thinking that's causing the attack, or the idea that they're being attacked.
Yes.
So if I can be honest in my day, and I do my best to do that, I don't always do well, but I do my best. I do my best to listen to my words and hear what I'm saying and see where I'm trying to avoid somebody, because I grew up thinking if I could avoid people's hostility, I was creating a friend. But what I was creating was somebody close to me that had a suicide vest on that eventually exploded.
You're so funny, Jack.
It's look at the metaphors today. We're seeing people are blowing themselves up in the name of something that's supposed to be godly, but it doesn't seem to be godly at all. It's not about creation, it's about destruction. Like, it's as though God is so inept and he's completely impotent, creates everything, and he's infinite, but we need to kill each other to prove who's right. This is crazy. This is crack on steroids. And we're witnessing it. We're watching it. It's on the news. It's in the papers.
Exactly.
Our job starts with what each of us can do and are perfectly capable of doing. And being honest isn't about telling the truth. It's about speaking accurately to our experience, which includes things that aren't true. It's the beginning of reconciliation with what's wrong, rather than an attempt to pretend we're always right. That's the old idea about, I'm going to protect this thing that's wrong by claiming to always be right. And now I have to insist anyone who isn't thinking like I am is a threat to me. And I've got to either overcome them or ignore them and deny them. And what I'm doing is expressing on a macro level what I'm doing on a micro level in my own experience. I'm thinking myself is damaged. Myself is wrong. I don't have a self in my thinking. I have thinking of itself. And by thinking it's who I am, I undermine my thinking's ability to actually function to the degree it's designed to in the most beneficial way. So talking about this can be very encouraging. It can also be very discouraging, because it seems when what's wrong is looked at as wrong, it seems like too much to ever deal with. But once we have the capacity to notice that if what's wrong is the same deluded idea, the same delusional ideas that I maintained, as soon as I realized I was doing it, I wasn't doing it because it became obvious. I wasn't in them anymore. I was looking at them, and I realized if I'm looking at them, I'm not them. It's something I'm doing. It's not something I am. Huge shift. Then all of a sudden, intuition is knowledge beyond reason. What does that mean? We start actually thinking of things we normally wouldn't think were possible, because the knowingness starts expressing itself through our thoughts, rather than me in my thoughts thinking about my thoughts, wondering why I don't ever seem to know enough to resolve the problem. It starts just flowing through us.
Is that rocketed into the fourth dimension, as they say?
You know, it's very interesting. I was at an emotional sobriety workshop a year ago, and I thought it was a workshop, so I was adding a lot of my own thinking, which wasn't that welcome. But That came up. And what's interesting about this, and Gabe can help me on this, he's a lot better read in the physics department than I am. But what's interesting is that within the fourth dimension is time and space. And within this universe, light speed seems to be the fastest thing. Now there's some contest that there may be some other things that are faster. But for the most part, light speed is an absolute speed, meaning it does not slow down, it does not speed up. It's always whatever it is. And it's never affected by anything if something's going half light speed is still doing full speed, which is why it's absolute. So that's a very close universal metaphor for the idea of an infinite source. The infinite source doesn't change when I think it's bigger, it doesn't get bigger. When I think it's smaller, it doesn't get smaller. What gets bigger or smaller are my thoughts about it getting bigger or smaller. And to the degree that my thoughts aren't accurate, then I struggle with that thing. That thing is not struggling with me. I'm not actually struggling with that thing. I'm struggling with my thoughts about that thing. Okay?
I'm thinking if it's too late to drop this class still.
And still get credit.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about light speed is that if anything is traveling at light speed, time has no effect on it. Zero.
Right?
So now Einstein said that time and space are combined. They're the same thing. So it means dimension has no effect on it. And what has God always been seen as? Light. What is enlightenment? Radiance, brilliance, intellect, wisdom. All that stuff has been seen as a shining light. What would be dark? Eyes closed, dreaming while we're awake, thinking what's happening isn't happening because we think it's in the dark. And because nobody else can see it, we don't think it's there. And we think if we hide it, we're better off, rather than start to actually talk about it publicly and say, no, I can do that, but it doesn't help me feel better. It doesn't help me get better, because when I begin to think I'm in the dark, I begin to feel afraid and disconnected. Why? Because the nature of life is light and love. It isn't hate and exclusion and separation and all that kind of stuff. It's an inclusive, absolute state of being. So that exists in our universe. And Gabe, correct me where I'm off here. I know you're off.
But I was talking to Anthony about this the other day, that space can expand faster than the speed of light.
Yes.
That's why.
Which is why it allows for light to continue to speed. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, its fabric moves faster.
But think about that. The light is almost creating its own end.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost is as the space increases, because that's interesting. The universe seems to be expanding faster than the light.
Mm-hmm.
So it must be that it isn't space. It must be going into something that isn't space. So to your point earlier, Anthony, if you think of the finite and something limited, and then begin to look at and say, what would be limiting it?
Right.
Wouldn't there have to be something beyond it for it to even seem limited? So the finite becomes infinite. And you see, oh, that thing it seems to be moving into, it isn't moving into. It's just generous enough to give it all the room it needs and wants to go, period.
And that's what Einstein, his brilliant mind, the first equations of relativity, he couldn't come to terms with the expanding universe. He thought it was static. So his first equations were wrong. Look up Einstein's biggest blunder and you'll see what he's
Thanks,
talking
Gabe.
about.
So think about that, though, in relation to our conversation. When I think my thoughts are true, I think they're limited to my thoughts.
Yeah.
And the one thing that held Einstein up when he was considering what he did to help understand the universe was imagine one thought about how the universe was, that it was static, it was fixed, it wasn't growing. And he was confused as a result of it. The universe wasn't confusing him. It was his thought about it. And one thought of many. He probably had many thoughts that were accurate, but the one thought was stuck in his heel. But what was he? Willing enough to continue to look, willing enough to continue to see.
Yeah.
If we're honest and we're willing to look, we will see. If we're dishonest and we're willing to look, we will only see what we think is there so that we can continue to pretend we have nothing to do with it, so that we can feel that it's happening to us and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. That's addiction. It's a sick result from a sick thought. It's always going to be sick if the thought's sick. Always. So if I'm looking for what and where and how and why and when from sick thinking, what am I going to find? Sick what, why, where, when, and hows. They're all going to come to conclusions that aren't healthy. Rather than start to say, that it's happening, I can be assured of. In Heidegger's book, Gabe, as far as I read, I got to the point where he basically said, if you can consider whether you belong, you belong. If you can consider whether you exist, you must exist. And I thought, okay, that's the end of that book. I don't need to go any deeper. Because it was so simple. And I thought, that's very telling from one of the great philosophical minds to simply come to a conclusion so obvious. And yet within the scattered brains of thought, it seems like the last thing to ever even consider, because what we're looking for is the impossibility to become impossible within the disease, sick, mentally ill thoughts. And what's interesting is the impossible is impossible because it's impossible. So it's never been possible and it never will be possible, or it wouldn't be impossible. We're not talking about something that can happen someday. We're talking about, in absolute terms, something that cannot happen because it doesn't exist. Now, if everything exists, we're the only ones entertaining these kind of ideas that something we think about that doesn't exist can exist. This isn't happening in the universe. It's happening in the brains of humans. The universe isn't struggling with itself. It is not getting a facelift because the wrinkles in time are becoming deeper. And if that's our source, it might be worth mentioning it. Might be worth starting to see that that's the bounty, that's the abundance, rather than live in the scarcity that we create, seemingly engulfed in the flames of the fear, because we think we're the idea, we think we're in the idea, and then when the idea is based in a lie, it's filled with fear because we know better. Contemplation is simply consideration. That's all. And consideration goes both directions. If I'm considerate in my thinking, I'm probably going to be very considerate of other people's thinking because I'll be interested in what they're thinking rather than feel I'm under attack from what they're thinking. Makes them interesting rather than act disinterested and trying to get away from them all the time. All of a sudden, everybody becomes a pool of exploration and potential. That's a loving interaction compared to a brittle, hateful, spiteful, contemptful, broken relationship. But we can't even break the relationships. Again, it's all delusion. It's all thought. We're intimately connected. It's our nature. And to think anything else is to think things that are else or else are all that there is. That may be why people say, you better do that or else. As though the worst is going to happen if you don't. And we condemn ourselves to that. And even the condemnation we're condemning ourselves to is temporary as the thought we have about it as being thought of as real. Doesn't exist. There's no basis for it. Substance and understanding are both the same thing. Our understanding is how we see things that we can't see with our eyes. It doesn't mean they're unseen because they're known. It's like dogs can hear things we can't hear. It doesn't mean those sounds aren't being made because we can't hear them. There are probably colors we don't see. We see probably general colors, but not all there's an infinite variation of those colors. We may not see each one of those, but we see enough to make sense of it. If we think enough properly to make sense of things, we'll start making sense in the things we do. Rather than blame the world for making no sense and thinking that we might as well just go ahead and continue to do the same thing. Why not? If the most elementary aspect of our thinking is wrong, the fractured state of seeming mind, which is actually a fractured state of brain and thinking, not mind and knowing, is going to just feed on that like a rabid dog eating itself or a cannibal eating itself. Even cannibals haven't been known to eat themselves. And yet that's exactly what this kind of thinking does. It just devours itself from the inside, and we feel it. Again, the trauma is very obvious. It's horrifying, terrifying. And to feel that we're stuck and alone is, again, another lie. It's something we can do, but it's not true. So talking about this with others, and it doesn't mean saying what I say, doesn't mean saying what anyone says. It means beginning to notice that you have an ability to say things that occur to you that you don't think you should say. And I would suggest when I started saying the things that occurred to me for the sake of simply beginning to speak what was happening, things changed dramatically around me because people didn't react the way I thought they would. They reacted the way they reacted, or they responded the way they reacted. And in most cases, people opened up where I expected them not to, and I thought they would shut down. Why? Because we all share the same nature. We all know the same knowing. We all are aware of the same awareness. If you approach anything from an honest standpoint, even to admit you're wrong without even knowing you're wrong yet, but simply say, this is the thought I have, and share it, people don't tend to react to it because you've told them, this is a thought I'm having. I'm going to share it with you. Relationships are broken over those thoughts. And yet they're not broken at all. What's broken is our ability of thinking of the relationship is dependent on the thinking being the same as our thinking. And if the thinking isn't like our thinking, we don't want anything to do with the other thinking because we say we don't want anything to do with the person, which is putting personalities before principles rather than principles before personalities. If principles are principles, they are principled for all of us, all of us. And it doesn't make us immoral to think immoral thoughts. It makes the thoughts unusable. And we become demoralized trying to use unusable thoughts over and over again, wondering why things aren't going well. We don't become immoral in our essence, but our human experience begins to operate on a basis that has no morality. And that's a choice. And to come to terms with that is to begin to admit the nature of our responsibility, our ability to respond, which to MK's points earlier, he's gotten off, but I think he did. To MK's point earlier, he was talking about the desensitization that he went through, trying to feel less of what was happening so that he could think he was feeling better. But in doing that, you end up feeding the problem, and it grows. So whatever you're doing to feel better, you have to do more and more and more and more of, and that's largely what leads to overdoses.
Jack, what if someone's so overdosed in their thinking, decades of thinking something's true and real? Can they be instantly Narcaned? I mean,
Well, the question is their thinking true and real?
no, it's not.
Okay. So then it's never been true and real, so it hasn't mattered how long they've done it. It just seems to, see, that's how we use the past against her. Well, I've done it for 30 years, I'm just going to continue. Well, why would we choose to continue to be insane if we could simply say, if I don't start it, I'm not going to suffer all these contemptful consequences that I feel? If you were thinking correctly, you wouldn't be thinking the disenfranchised, disgusting, disturbed thoughts you're thinking. It's literally, we think we're in it, Gabe. We think when we think thoughts are reality, we think we're in the thoughts. We've lost perspective. When in fact we're the observer of those thoughts. We simply seem to observe our feelings better than our thoughts, but our feelings are consequences of our thoughts.
Well, I'm trying to do it specifically to someone close to me. Something happened last night, and it's like I wish, how do you tell someone who's not necessarily a drug or alcohol addict, a normie as we call them, but they're still addicted to this thinking that's not true and real. And I tried to give some of your verbiage and our discussions to them, and it maybe had a small impact, but I guess if it took Anthony 3 years, it'll take them a while too.
You still got a year to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was
That's an
thinking.
investment in a thought. My experience, Gabe, so sort of like with sobriety, people share their experience. They don't say, this is what you need to have experienced to have the experience. They just share their experience and their strength and their hope, right? That's what the stories are about. And
Yeah, and not get upset like I did the other day about that girl who showed up like the day after we spoke again to take her 3-day chip again. But
oh, really?
yeah,
She was here too, right?
no, that's not Melissa. No.
Oh,
It's another person. It's another one.
yeah. Well, if if you're going at someone with something that you've left unresolved, you're going to make sure that they don't solve their problem so you can continue to think it's them. I mean, the sickness is so perverse and so pervasive, and yet it's always, always, always face first, right in front of us if we're looking clearly. So my experience is, Gabe, if the thinking I'm doing is causing a disturbance, and I begin to say to my experience and my thoughts, this experience I'm having is coming from thoughts that are disturbed. And the thoughts wouldn't be disturbed if they were right and real and true. They would not be disturbed at all because I would be thinking about something that would be confirmed by peace and stability, not disruption and disturbance and all that stuff. So if the person I'm thinking about, think of them as similar to my own observation of my own thinking. Now you've got another body thinking, and they offer you the same perspective that your thinking can offer you if you're looking at it honestly. And to begin to see your own deficiency in communicating is beginning to see how little we've done this honestly. None of us, like MK was talking about, going to Toastmasters to learn how to speak in public. You would think after living a whole life, we would all know how to speak in public. We've been in public our whole life.
Yeah.
But we've been hiding. We've been manipulating ideas about who we think we are and wonder. We only want to pose that to people that like us, which is why we so often turn to our family, because no higher development of this conspiracy occurs in anything greater than the family. Because we've been doing it since we were so young, and we think they've already agreed not to call me on these things, not to talk about those things. And they may not even know they agreed to it, but they don't do it because they just have this intuitive sense to stay away from that. And I would say that isn't intuitive. That's just a bearing of subconscious ideas that keep me safe in the relationship and say that's love. That is not love at all because it's condemnation. It's not freedom. But the love doesn't go away. You know, one thing to see is that if it's true for you, it's true for them. And then begin to see if the thing you're struggling with in them, you wouldn't be struggling with if you weren't struggling with it. And start to back off a little bit. And you start to switch the thinking of what they're doing wrong is something you're doing. It starts to give you a clearer view of how intact they actually are. And my sense is, like I said to Anthony earlier, I think you were on when I mentioned that, but the obvious struggles that people have openly are pleas. They're asking for help. It doesn't mean if you came to the rescue, it's like saving somebody that's drowning. Most people who are really drowning will kill the person who comes to save them, and they will also die. They're killing the person coming to help them, and they will drown that person and themselves in the name of help. Because once you're in that sick mode of fear, everything reverses. If you're seeing it as them, begin to say, I wouldn't be seeing it as them if I wasn't doing it. And I am now central to the problem. And it really turns the table on, I would suggest you probably have built up frustration and irritation and sort of explosive time-bound things that you were just referencing that with someone else in another situation. But that what happens is our expectations are dashed and we are pissed. We're angry. We want this to be fixed and we want somebody else to fix it because we're not willing. Nobody can have an impact on us greater than our own thinking does, ever. Even when somebody was viciously attacking us violently, at least that situation is happening, and what we're responding to is happening. It's not accidental. It's happening. We're witnessing it from that point of view. There's a clarity in real fear that does not come with that other self-centered, anxious fear that we create by thinking about our thinking.
So you
The difference with the violent attack is that they're very limited in time typically, where this other thing has been going on for decades, as you're pointing out.
yeah. So it's just about showing them our experience and trying to build a house or tear down theirs brick by brick, and not trying to use a wrecking ball.
Well, I wouldn't try to tear it down at all. It doesn't exist. You're thinking of it as something that's impossible to deal with as you thought it was before we started talking about the possibility of dealing with it.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
So
I see
that's
it
just
so clearly in this person that it's the exact same thing I was thinking about my dad in the past, and she's
Yeah.
doing it too. And then it's so clear. It's like you just want to just say, here, listen to these few sentences, and then you're fixed. You're solved.
so let's look at that for a second rather than what to do. So I would say you might want to note how much you care about that person.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. Why would you get all worked up about it if you didn't absolutely want them to be the best they could possibly be?
Yeah, it's true.
So I mistook that in people forever. And now I get awed by the fact that I even have the capacity to care, given that I didn't care for so long or acted like I didn't care while I cared. It's a little overwhelming, but it's awe-inspiring also to notice that we have an innate generosity that when we express, it's bountiful. And it doesn't come because of big ideas on our part. It's just an essence of what we're sharing that we already know. It's an essence of a loving, absolute nature. It's not about spite and contempt and force and just listen to what I say and you'll be better.
That's
You
what
didn't
I
listen.
think, though.
You
That's
didn't
what I
listen to your own greater self while you
know.
were preoccupied. Why would they?
That's a good point. Touche.
So if you see that you have that, that's something to notice. But keep in mind to notice it, if it's true, if it's real, if you're really beginning to notice that knowingness and that generosity, they have that too. They already have it. It's not something they don't have because they're doing all this superficial clamoring that's causing all those disturbances. They have it. And as you begin to see them that way, the clearing comes from what we're each doing individually. And the only thing that's individual in any of us is we get to choose what we want to think. That's it. That's what seems to define us when we think our thoughts are reality. We seem to be defined by what we do. When we're not defined by what we do, our thinking is defined by what we do. Who we are is impossible to define. You can't put words to a being nature that's complete. As Anthony was saying earlier, it's being, it's is. How can you reduce it down to nothing? You begin to realize that there is no word for it. There's nothing but an absolute state of knowing that isn't in words. It isn't in thought. It's just a knowing presence, like we all know. It's kind of like when people know what to do and they know what to do, and you say, how do you know? And they can't tell you.
Yeah.
They just know. They just know they know. So that's the knowingness we're talking about. If that's something we all have, when you begin to see that that person has it, Gabe, rather than you need to tell them, you can begin to actually have words that will be valued because you'll speak to them differently than you will when you think you have something they don't have. So when you talk to them as though they already have it, it will be a lot less serious. You don't need to take something serious that's a joke. So when you talk honestly, it's not serious. It's just the nature of reality. It's just the nature of an absolute state of being that we share. And you'll know and watch as you won't have the insistence to demand and create the reactivity. You're creating I do this all the time. I do it here all the time. Not all the time. I do it a lot, enough to be able to speak to. I try to push in the people's direction of their reactivity so they can make it more pronounced and fight. And maybe walk away and say, wow, I really get upset when that happens. But I do too. I want to have things heard. I want to see people receive it. I want to have them get better. I do that exact same thing. I'm not particularly fooled when I do it because I can read the signs now after years and years and years of doing this. And those years, by the way, aren't something people have to suffer through. They just evidence my own defiance, my own defensiveness, my own reactivity, my own fear that I think I'm saving myself for some time that doesn't exist. Like I'm trying to get Tupperware for my body so it'll last. But that awareness, thinking about things is that I care about this person. That person is intact. They are as they are. And it includes all the thinking they're doing. But the thinking and the problems of the thinking are small compared to an infinite absolute source. They're so small as to not even exist. You know in math, right? That within the infinite realm, there's no mathematics. There's no place and room for numbers. Nothing counts because everything is everything. And there are no things. It's just an essence of pure consciousness. It's an absolute state of bliss and knowingness, which makes all that we do possible. We have the freedom to choose because we can choose anything we want. And if what we choose is to feel condemned, that's a pretty sick choice to make when we have all other possibilities possible. And to think we're stuck in it is what addiction and disease is. That's the mental illness. That's insanity. So I would say, Gabe, how long have you been coming?
Oh gosh, a year and a half.
Okay. So when you first came, some of this may have sounded foreign.
No, like I said, wasn't as foreign. I think you speak my language in a way, and the panic attacks and the fear subsided quite quickly. I mean, almost instantly, but over several weeks and a month.
But the things you could register, you registered quickly, and there was probably still some more foreign language.
Oh yeah, still some stuff to work through for
Yeah.
sure.
So my experiences in my history, in my present, those things are reflections of my own volition to make believe that I've still got some truth of my own. I haven't let it all go. And it isn't that I haven't let it go. I insist on continuing to maintain it. If there's nothing to be let go of because it's delusional, it isn't in the letting go and the not letting go. It's in the restarting it all the time. Thinking I need to do something for some value that I think is going to be lost if I don't do it, as though I'm incomplete without the things I do. If I'm absolutely complete to begin with, then the things I do can become more meaningful than to constantly try to patchwork a self I think I'm correcting or appearing as. And for anyone listening, I am not suggesting that this panacea arrives and everybody's great. Because I will assure you, when you start looking at this honestly, it's going to feel all the things you thought you've run from for your entire life are going to become evident. And it's going to seem impossible. And the reason it seems impossible is because you're starting to witness the impossibility of those thoughts. Literally, accurately. When things seem impossible, you're facing impossibility. It's not impossibility you're facing. It's an idea that's impossible because it has no basis. Like a fraction with no denominator, it's always, no matter how big you get the numerator, it's always going to be zero. There's nothing there. And to begin to get familiar with this is to begin to face not a few things and the thing, but all things that you've been doing. And the disillusion that can come with that is the admission that it's been an illusion. It's very disillusioning to find out that your life has been built on a lie, an imagination thought to be true, fantasy as reality, and then realize it hasn't been my life at all. Life was not built on that. Life was life the whole time while I was imagining my life depended on those things. Again, delusion, ideas. Now, the beauty of this is that we can pick any of those things up again, like any drug addict, any alcoholic, any sexaholic, any gambler. We can always go back. But to begin to recover sanity, the choice to do that becomes insane rather than the choice to do the only thing possible. The insanity in that idea that it's the only thing possible is coming from an insane idea. The sane idea is, I have no obligation to do that. That would be ridiculous. I know exactly where that's going to go. And along with that freedom, I would say, Gabe, whatever you're speaking to this individual about, you are probably speaking better than you ever have. And your yearning for doing better is an awareness that you're capable of better, that you're not yet doing yet, that you're not yet doing. Gabe may be out of reach, or he apparently he occasionally has kids.
Sorry, I was on mute talking to myself.
Oh, so you heard.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I will take that. I am food for thought.
Now, keep something else in mind while we're thinking about this. And I'm saying keep in mind because it is in the mind, things can't be lost. So you don't need to keep it. But if you keep in your brain the thought that mind isn't something that changes, it's just an absolute knowing, rather than consider the stories and continue to repeat the stories, that's what the obsession is the time spent trying to figure out how to figure something out that doesn't exist and can't be figured out. It's really dallying in this idea that if I think harder and longer, I'll eventually get it right. And something that doesn't exist can't be right. It can be thought of.
Finally, you tell us.
It can be thought of. It can be thought of all we want, but when you think of it as something you're thinking about, it doesn't have the same perplexity and the same condemnation and the same seeming mystery and the same haunting images and imagery. It doesn't happen. So it's something we're perfectly capable of doing, but that knowing nature does not change whatsoever. And that's why we know when something's wrong. It's why we know why we're suffering, because we know better the whole time.
So these are like cheat codes that you're giving out, is what you're saying.
No, I get a sense there's a listening going on, so I'm going a little further. But Anthony, I've said these things 100 times, maybe more. I don't want to go through it all to count them. So. I don't want to listen through it all to count them. But
these are cheat codes. You know what a cheat code is, right?
Yeah, get to the point.
No, cheat code is to win the video game. They sell cheat codes.
And
you know when you get to a certain point to do, they tell you what you're supposed to do. These are cheat codes.
Kind of like the right answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if the knowingness is always there, it's why we suffer and struggle. So Gabe, to the point I was making earlier, when you're witnessing somebody struggling, it's because they know. When you think they don't know and you need to teach them, you're stripping them of the dignity of already knowing and giving them the indignation that they should listen to you. Because they're not even listening to their own experience. Why are they going to listen to you?
Damn it.
But in talking about this and admitting those things, which is exactly what this discussion was designed to do originally and is now doing better.
But then, okay, so then I also have children who, as my parental duty is to help them gain a compass in life, isn't it appropriate and almost mandated to teach them these things?
Well, what we've historically been doing is teaching kids how to continue to maintain the lie. These are things you have to do. You have to be polite. No, you don't. You have to be well-mannered. No, you don't. It's not honest to be dishonest. And the mannerisms come with kids. I mean, when you said that, I thought at first, listen to them more. Because the kids are much more tuned into this because they haven't developed the thick skin that we seem to call maturity and adulthood. And they're probably fresher, and you'll hear them say things when you're interested in hearing them that are pretty insightful and pretty much blow the cover off the adults in the room. Do you remember I talked about the S training? Do you remember the S training, the original S training? Ty, you remember that, don't you? We talked about that back from the 70s. Anyway, it was the original S training for the adult started on a Friday night.
Is that short for echelon? Or no? That's something different.
No, it was Earhart Seminar Training. It led to the Forum and Landmark. Landmark's the most recent incarnation. It's been going on for 40 or 50 years, and it's a life experience training. But for the adults, the days were like 20-hour days. because they were about breaking down this sort of preoccupation of thought and all that kind of stuff. For the kids, it was like 4 hours one day. The kids got it immediately. And by the end of the kids thing, they were telling their parents what their parents weren't doing because they had the clarity. They're young enough. They hadn't been indoctrinated into this sort of conspiracy that we've all been participating in. So they're very, very clear. And they're very confused by why they think all these rules seem to be so important. When they see parents not being honest, they see parents swearing and then tell them not to swear. That's interesting. They know the dishonesty, which generally, my experience around teen years, they say, you're full of shit. I don't want to listen to you. They start to realize they're forging their own identity, and yet they tend to succumb to the social peer pressures and other things that seem to give us the justification to continue to just do the stuff that seems to always be done. And what else is there? Because at 13, they're certainly not paying rent and utility bills and all the other things that become such a huge preoccupation. They're still basking in the lather and sun of everything being taken care of, so they have the freedom to think. But we do too, and our productivity is based on thinking healthy thoughts that are moral because they're usable. I looked this up earlier. I love the definition of moral because we think of it often as like to be considered immoral is to be considered a liar. But we all have immoral thoughts to the degree that we entertain thoughts that aren't true and we think they're true. That's an immoral thought because there's no basis of it. But the definition of relating to or concerned with the principles or rules of right conduct or the distinction between right and wrong, ethical. What's right conduct? Doing things that are helpful, beneficial, productive. What would wrong conduct be? Ineffective, inefficient, inadequate, things that don't work, focusing on what doesn't work. Stealing people's stuff doesn't work. Hurting other people doesn't work. What helps? Helping, actually helping, having enough that you're not in a state where you need to steal from others to survive. That's what abundance is. And the nature of an infinite source is certainly abundant. And scarcity, I realize it's scarcity. It's a city filled with fear in our own thinking. We think we live in that fear. It's self-induced. It isn't a reality. It's self-induced. Our body does not have an opinion. It will take our direction. It will it'll manifest the experience we're asking for, just like a director would hope everyone on the film set would take his direction and act out and do according. The lighting people and the stage setters and all that prepare the set so they can get the shot. Our body does that. And it manifests. If we can be in dreams and be horrified, we have clear awareness of the impact our thinking has on our body. And it feels real because we're feeling it. But if it's coming from fantasy, we're capable of feeling fantasy as much as we are reality. But we get used to thinking it is reality, and that becomes a major flaw because the difference is the fantasy that thought to be real is horrifying, even though some of it can feel good. But the reality that's felt and expressed is never horrifying. It always comes with an absolute state of calm and peace. And that is our natural state that we're witnessing right now, which, like a blank canvas or a scale with no weight on it, becomes affected with any weight and any motion. A blank canvas, anything you do to it affects the entirety of it. Any weight you put on that scale affects that scale. Any weight, a speck of dust. That clarity offers us the clarity of what's wrong, which is why we feel wrong. But because we think we're who we are in thought, we think we're wrong, we're immoral, we're unjustified, we're sick, we're insane, when it's the thinking we're doing that is insane, immoral, unjust, and unjustified. It's what we're choosing to do and then how we're choosing to deal with what's happening as a result. We know when something's wrong. When I think it's right, I'm going to continue to perpetuate the wrong in the name of trying to make it right. That's force. That's violence. in the inception of it. Now, if we didn't know this, we'd have to bring everyone into a 4-year academic program to teach them this. And then we'd have to rely on their assimilation of this information. It's like business school. Not everybody comes out of, they get the same information. Everybody goes out and creates a different kind of business in a different way. Some succeed, some fail. This thing we know can't fail because it doesn't change. It's absolute. It's always with us. It's always been with us. Our dread and our mourning and our grief has been the inability or unwillingness, our seeming inability, because we've been able, we just haven't wanted to be. We've been grieving over the seeming loss of it, when in fact all we've done is seemingly replace it with an experience that became so compelling and so intoxicating and so seemingly consuming that we thought there was nothing else. And that's the desensitization. We've undermined our whole capacity for our functional capacity to make believe that what we are thinking is truth and reality, rather than realize truth and reality were well before we started thinking, and will exceed our thinking too, but they will not exceed our being nature. Nor did they. They didn't start before our being nature, because we've been part of it from the beginning. And there was no beginning in something that's infinite. There is no beginning, there is no end. Yet in our human experience, it's always beginning because there is no end. It's always new, always new, always. There's never a moment we can't choose to do whatever we can do, ever. There's moments we can think we can't choose to do what we want to do. But again, it shows how we think thinking is the dominant source, when in fact it's critical to our human function. We've turned it into a liability rather than express it as an asset and a resource. We claim it's not a resource. The refrigerator is empty, the kids are starving while the refrigerator is full, and we've just locked the refrigerator. We're afraid of running out of food, so we starve the kids and ourselves for the sake of thinking we have more. All the false pretenses and ideas are exactly that same line of thinking. Different ways, same source. I'm going to fill the emptiness. Something that doesn't exist can't become fulfilled. We can do more is exactly what addiction is. More is never enough. When enough is never enough, words have no meaning. Language has no place. Reason has no place. It all falls apart. It's exactly what addiction is, and it starts in thought. When we think the thought is real and true, we start an interminable condition that will last as long as we continue to think that way. And it only seems interminable because we insist on maintaining it to give ourselves the impression that we're right. We keep thinking we're going to get the thought right, but the whole time we think we're right by doing it, which is why we can be insufferable. People think of us that way, and we're embarrassed because they're actually clearly admitting what we're feeling and doing. What else? Is there anything left in the universe to consider? Have we gotten to the premise?
If you're asking the question.
I guess there's things certainly we can talk about. How's the weather in Michigan, Mark?
It's okay. It's a little chilly, but lots of leaves on the ground.
It's about that time of the year. I remember
driving home from Ann Arbor.
I remember as a child. Anyway, I love you guys. I love that we do this together. I appreciate it a lot. I know that it takes a commitment. I know that it takes time. I know that it takes effort. And I appreciate all those steps that you take to be here. My experience is that doing this together gives us and anyone listening a chance to see this happen more publicly and realize that conversation is one of our primary forms of communication. My experience, I love to write. I'm a much better talker than I'm a writer, and I think I have a long way to go in both departments. I think I can be better in both. And how I get better is by working with people, talking to people, opening my experience up, and also then considering what happened afterward and saying, oh, those are some things I could get better at. Rather than why did I do it? I shouldn't have done it and be upset. I look at it as a learning curve. When I find conflict in others, I look at the opportunity to be guided by it as to my own lack that I'm struggling with, not theirs. They have their struggle. They get to deal with their choices, not mine. That's not my business what they do when they're thinking and choosing. It's my business to begin with. And then if I can be clear about it, I can have some business with them that would actually make sense and be productive rather than just be monkey business where I'm interfering with their own capacity to do what they're perfectly capable of doing on their own. I strip others of their dignity and their essence by making believe it's up to me to tell them what they should or shouldn't be doing or what they have to do. If we already have what we have and we start thinking we have what we have, we don't feel we have to do anything. We start realizing that we choose everything and want everything we have. And that's a very different experience. Now, I would suggest it's been that case the whole time. So to the degree that we don't think we have what we want, we simply didn't realize the dream we had in our thought when in fact the dream was not reality. It was just an overinflated idea of what we should get or could get. And the accuracy of it all is seeing that our intention is in fact what happens. If we really wanted something else and could do that thing we wanted, that's what we would be doing. And the fact that what's happening is exactly what we want. To come to terms with that can be a little disarming and a little humbling, but the humility is only deflating the ideas we have that go beyond the actual reality we're facing with the capacity we have to do the things we want. We can have the complete capacity to do anything we want. It doesn't mean we're going to be able to do that thing right now. If you want to be an airplane pilot, you do not do that by wishing and hoping you are. It takes time and skill. Interacting with people takes some time, takes some practice. Functioning with a body takes some practice, some time. We can know it all and still not know how to apply it properly. That is not different for any of us, and yet we all do it differently in any way we claim to be different. So if we have something in common, we can work collectively in common for the good of the whole rather than the parts and the pieces, acting as though they're separate and need to dominate the others. There's no reason for that other than the reasons concluded in the sick thinking that arrives at that. And it's been going on a long time, and it does not have to continue for any other reason than we each choose to continue to perpetuate it right now. Period. Bingo. Lindsay's giving me a bingo.
It is what it is. Yes, it's exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So my sense is we know this, and we've been grieving and mourning the loss of the opportunity to express this, thinking that it's the world that's pitiful, when in fact it's my own demented thoughts that are pitiful. Self-pity is pitying the self we think we are because it isn't who we are. We wouldn't feel pitiful about it if it was who we are.
Jack, what is pitiful? What is the word? I don't understand what it means. Pitiful?
What is it?
What do you say something that I never heard before? You use
Pitiful?
a specific word.
Oh, pitiful?
Yes. What does it mean?
Self.
I want to understand.
I'm going to read it to you.
Oh, thank you.
Sympathetic or kindly sorrow evoked by the suffering, distress, or misfortune of another, often leading one to give relief or aid or show mercy. So that's actually pity, a cause or reason for pity, sorrow, or regret. Motivated by a sense of pity or sympathy for others or oneself. So pity by itself, to feel pity or compassion, be sorry for. The self-pity is actually a pitiful self because we know that isn't who we are. We're making believe it's who we are. We're thinking of it. We're thinking of this thought as being everything. And that's a pitiful thought in relation to everything being everything. We're discounting our capacity. We're undermining it. We're depreciating it. We're depreciating our capacity. We're diminishing our capacity by making believe that feeling sorry for ourselves, for instance, is a goal or a condition that's worth continuing. The only reason we feel sorry is because we're so apologetic for continuing to do it, because we're sorrowful for the impact we're creating, but we treat it, the words are used in very different ways. So self-pity, I would say, is a pitiful self expressing itself.
Thank you. Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, and I keep looking the words up because every time I do, it gives me a little more clarity in how the words are either used or misused. And the connotation in words moves all the time. Like the idea we have to do something. Have is a possessive, and I've researched that back in the Oxford English Dictionary that goes back as long as the language has been written. It's a 1,500-page book, and it's an almost microscopic print. And it's always been a possessive, but we talk about having to do something as though it's an imperative, a must, a shall, a demand. When we don't have what we have, we think we have to do things. All of a sudden, we feel compelled to make up for the thing we claim we don't have. And it's all coming out of that thought that we don't have what we have. And if the essence of our awareness is essential, we must have it. It can't be anything else. And to think otherwise is simply a function of thought, dysfunctional thought. So always happy to talk during the week too, as you guys know, and as time permits. And I really appreciate doing this. I mean, it's really like turning the light on my brain whenever we do it. And for the people I do it with during the week, it's the same thing. It just gives me a chance to hopefully get better, but us a chance to actually begin to perform in unison and see the commonality that exists, and also struggle with the struggles commonly and see, okay, it's okay to struggle. It's all right. We're not gonna sink. I'm not gonna grab you by the throat and drown you. Though, Anthony, I had those thoughts. So we're getting better. I appreciate this very much. We'll do it again next Sunday. And
Thanks, Jack.
I think this month, no, we'll meet the Thanksgiving weekend too, because that's actually the week before the end of the month, which is odd. So we'll meet the first three Sundays. And if anyone wants to do a one-on-one, Gabe, I think we did one. I'd like to do another with you. Lindsay, if you want to do a one-on-one for an hour or so, I'd love to do that with you and record it and let everyone out there listen to a narrower view, but a more expanded view on you.
Okay, when you are available to do that one?
Well, let's talk tomorrow. If you have the time, email me or I'll email you, and we'll start to make a plan. I like to do them in the morning.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes.
Anthony, thank you very much. That was very insightful today. Ty,
yeah, thank you.
Gabe.
Bye, Lindsay. Bye.
Janet, thanks for joining.
Aloha.
Aloha. Love you guys.
All right. Thank you so much, Jack. Bye-bye.